Hello, and welcome to another Big Data London webinar. Today, we're talking about privacy automation. I'm Andy Steed. I'm Content Director of Big Data London, and I'm joined today by Peter Hoffman from OneTrust. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, yes, we'll be hearing from him later. So the eagle-eyed amongst you might notice that it's a different platform today, and that will be moving forward from now on with Big Data London webinars. So please send in any feedback that you have or things that we can make it easier. Essentially, format remains the same. There's a Q&A box at the bottom for you there where you can type in any questions you have. And I'll endeavour to ask as many as I possibly can at the time we've got allotted for Q&A at the end of the session. However, without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to the featured presenter today, Peter. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Andy. Let me just share my screen. And then the most uttered phrase in the last couple of years, can you see my screen?
I think we're all good. I think we're there, yes.
Excellent, brilliant. So thanks very much, Andy. Thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. Looking forward to sharing some insights with you today. We're going to be looking at privacy automation. How can you use privacy automation while also managing to innovate with your business and just in general maturing your privacy program. So I'll be covering some strategies that will be relevant regardless of where you are in that transformation, regardless of how mature your privacy program is, and also regardless of the size of your organization. So really something for everybody. So let's move to the next slide. So yes, so Pete Hoffman. So I joined OneTrust from Salesforce over a year ago, and I run one of our solution engineering teams here at OneTrust. So it's all about the technical positioning of our trust intelligence platform and ensuring that new customers get the best possible adoption of OneTrust. So nice to meet you. What's on the menu for today then? So we're going to start off looking at how privacy has evolved, privacy itself in a much more sort of broader landscape has evolved. Then we'll go into the details in terms of the actual building blocks of automation and the art of the possible in that arena. And then lastly, we'll finish up with some metrics around how you can measure success here, maybe some notes and ideas you can take back to your teams back at the office to build a business case for maybe using automation at your company as well. So let's begin by taking maybe a step back from data privacy and look at data in a more holistic way. We can all relate to this as individuals, never mind in our work life. There's a huge amount of data, that we're all storing, especially at companies. It's not so much, well, it's partly the amount of data, but it's also the variety of data that we're now storing. Lots of structured and unstructured data. If we think about the Zoom call that we're on, Teams calls that we do, there's facial data, voice, there's the messaging through the chat features. Obviously, we're presenting any content that we're presenting. We might be sharing attachments as well. All of this unstructured data. There's Slack, Teams, emails. Really, really hard to keep a track of all the data that we have, and especially in all these unstructured ways. And typically, not just webinars, these calls tend to be recorded by default now in a lot of organizations. If Bob couldn't make the call, then we'll record it and he can catch up later. More and more of these are being stored on organizations' networks. So that adds to the complexity of the growth of data, and that's a growth that we're only going to see continuing. So our current estimates are 2.5 exabytes of data being created every single day. That's quite a big number. It's hard to get your head around these numbers really often. To try and put that into context, it's estimated that if every single word ever uttered by humankind was recorded and stored, that would equal 5 exabytes. So every single word uttered by humankind is the equivalent of 2 days worth of our current data rates. So that's a bit mind-blowing when you think about it like that. So lots and lots of data, lots of quantity and lots of variety of data, but there's also different ways that we're getting data as well. If you think about the plethora of digital customer touch points now, obviously there's a website, there's mobile apps, there's Alexa, smartwatches, smart scales, Peloton bikes, all sorts of different ways that we're gathering data. British Airways are currently trialing the use of biometric technology for international flights at the moment. So what they're doing is they're collecting face, passport and boarding pass information, and then you just walk onto the flight. Basically they just scan your face, and you probably don't need to stop, or certainly only need to pause. In terms of a customer experience, especially for a frequent flyer, that's quite cool, right? That's quite amazing. It's almost frictionless. You're just walking onto the plane. But clearly all of the data that's being stored, whatever system they're storing it in, they're going to need to do more than a few controls and checks, aren't they, when we think what data they're collecting in order to give that experience. So all of these different digital touch points with customers need different controls placed on them. And if we think about the pace of digital change, obviously since the pandemic, that's also picked up a pace as well, hasn't it? It wasn't that long ago, but the idea of placing an order and then picking it up potentially without even going into the store, within an hour of placing the order, say, that would have been unthinkable even a few years ago. But now it's kind of expected, or certainly it's one of the options that we expect to be given. So we could be having that experience. We could be on our work laptops downloading data from a CRM or HR system, or we could be at home downloading a movie on a smart TV with the family. In each of these cases, we want and are sort of starting to expect a great experience, but also more and more people are becoming aware of their privacy. And privacy and personalization, these often seen at odds, these two things. We all benefit from these really slick experiences, but as I say, we're becoming much more aware of how much of our data we're giving up and wanting to know why. Also, we're turning up at these different touch points, but we're turning up in potentially different ways, in different identities. I think we should always try to have in mind that single individual that's on the other side of the equation, that customer or employee or whoever the stakeholder might be, will turn up in different identities depending on the scenario and the situation. If I'm on my work computer or in a webinar, I'm turning up as an employee of OneTrust and in that sort of professional capacity. And there may be data that I'm willing to share in that capacity, and data that I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing, working for my company. Whereas on my mobile phone, on my personal phone, doing Christmas shopping for the kids, I'm showing up as a dad, and there may be data that I wouldn't share as a OneTrust employee, but I am willing to share as a dad, and vice versa as well. So, I think it's really important for us as privacy practitioners to always think about not only who the other person on the other side of the equation is, but also what's their frame of mind, what persona, what identity are they showing up as, because that can help us give them not only a better experience, a more appropriate handling of their data, but also I think it's important for us to represent those individuals in our organizations. We're kind of in a way, I kind of see it as our duty to sort of champion them, be their champion within our organizations, and in a way we're on both teams in a way. Now there's obviously lots of statistics to back all this up. I won't throw 500 slides full of data at you around this. These stats are from an Adobe Trust report from this year, which is a good report. I recommend it. The one that jumps out to me here is the experiences one. So this is 72% saying that relevant content delivered at the right time and place actually boosts their trust with the brand. So this isn't saying 72% of people care about their privacy. Of course they do, everybody does. What this is saying is that if you give me a great experience while simultaneously proving to me that you care about my data, and that you've got your house in order in terms of privacy, then there's clear value for that brand or company or organization to be had, not just in boosting brand loyalty, but also boosting trust. So really, really interesting stats around this. So there's the amount of data, there's an increase in the variety of data, there's all the plethora of different touch points that we gather this data from, and the different identities that the stakeholder may be turning up as. On top of that, of course, as privacy practitioners, we all know there's the regulations, there's the privacy regulations. We've seen obviously an increase in the last few years, and that doesn't look to be slowing down too much. If we look at the map here, in the dark blue are the areas, territories where there's a modern privacy law has been passed. Light blue, there's a draft in place, and grey, there's nothing yet. If we look at the US, maybe it should be all of those colours, depending on which state we're looking at. But you know, Gartner is sort of updating this stat as we move along. But currently, they're saying at the end of next year, 75% of the world's population will be covered by modern privacy law. Now, as a data subject, that's brilliant. As a privacy professional, that's brilliant as well. But clearly, it gives us a certain amount of work to do, because there will always be grey areas between these. If we operate internationally, globally, and in this age of, you know, digital transformation, you know, most companies do operate globally, even those that didn't used to. We can see that, you know, there will be grey areas between these different regulations. If we look at, in particular, obligations around data retention, data minimization, we need to be aware of these differences, and we need to understand the risk appetite that our organization has around this. You know, it's you know, if we're having to fulfill a DSAR request from a Californian customer and a French customer, we may be having to operate in different ways to fulfill that particular request. So all of this adds to the complexity of the role. But what it all comes down to is that privacy is evolving beyond this sort of tick the box. We've got our regulatory compliance. We can prove that we've got that process in place. It's moving beyond ROPA into more of, you know, leveraging data in a trusted way, and being able to prove that you're doing so in a trusted way. So while developing and building trust with your customers, ensuring that trust, you know, if it does get damaged, it can be repaired in the mid to long term, there are some trends that are driving this. Firstly, we talked about the regulations. Obviously, we've talked about the data footprint, how it's expanding, and how we need, you know, it presents a challenge to keep track of all that data. And also the stakeholder awareness we've talked about as well. We've talked about it really from a customer perspective, but we need to remember also that in this age of stakeholder capitalism, it's customers, it's employees, it's investors who are investing in our company, it's third parties, vendors who are working with us, and it's, you know, the community at large. All of these are stakeholders, and they are all evaluating our business, whether we like it or not. So it's important that we are seen to be a trustworthy brand, and that we build trust and elevate the brand reputation across all of these different stakeholders. So that's the why, that's the sort of drivers as to why we're looking to automate our privacy programs. But how can we approach this challenge? You know, what are the practical steps? How do we actually get this started? So automating your privacy program can be broken down into 4 sort of key areas, basically. First off, it's that, as with all data decisions, the more the real time, the more the data is real time, the better those decisions, the more accurate those decisions based on that data will be. That's no different for privacy. Arguably, it's even more important for privacy, because we need to be sure that having collected, or, you know, having done our discovery, collected all that data, we need to at least be sure that it's actually accurate, that it's complete, that it's not out of date. You know, so we haven't gone to all that trouble only to serve up incorrect data. Secondly, we need to look at the data context. We've got some examples of this later on. You know, a piece of data can look maybe not too sensitive in isolation, but once we understand what data set it belongs to, then maybe it could be raising more flags than it would do in isolation. We need to look at program automation. You know, what parts of our current processes and workflows are manual and repeatable, you know, what candidates are there for automation. And then the data lifecycle. So this is the most advanced part. You know, if we go back upstream to these customer touch points, or the data sources, regardless of the stakeholders, if we go upstream to really understand what's happening with the data when it's collected, when we're giving out our disclosures and explaining what data we're collecting and why, when we're capturing data, consent around that data that's appropriate for the use, that information, that metadata about the data, if you like, that can travel that could be coupled with the data and as it travels through our data ecosystem, so that way, wherever it is in our IT landscape, everybody knows, all the stakeholders internal, they know what the data is for, where it came from, who should access it, how long it should be kept for, all of those key questions that we have about that data. So let's dive in and look at what areas are ripe for automation. So the first area, it's no surprise probably, is around the data map. As I've said, it's knowing where the data is from, who can access it, who is currently able to access it, who should access it. Manually doing this is incredibly time consuming. And as I say, keeping it up to date is then equally time consuming. So a real-time view of it is crucial. You may also maybe want to take into account the connections to other systems that maybe already has an understanding of this data. So work with the IT team to understand, is there already an inventory? We've worked with some customers that connect to a ServiceNow database because that's already got a list of assets and technology that's going to store data. So it saves them having to build that list out and inventory themselves. We can also dial that up in terms of complexity. Rather than just connecting to one source of that information, we could deploy what we call worker nodes to scan your entire network, for example, your entire system. So it sends us pieces of information, and we can then do a full catalog and analysis of the entire data landscape. So it's sort of crawl, walk, run in terms of how detailed we can go on this. I do, however, want to add the importance of the manual business reviews, this internal business reviews piece. It's so important to get the internal business commentary and context around how the data is being used, why it was captured back in the day, to have that sort of that wisdom of the crowd, that sort of legacy information that often is very hard to automate. It's often not written down. It's in people's heads. It's in your colleagues' heads. There's some things, there will always be something that you can't automate. So it's important not to say, I'm not going to say it's a magic button and you can automate everything away, because you potentially wouldn't even want to, even if you could. So these manual business reviews will be crucial to give that extra context and understanding to certain data and why it was captured and what we should be doing with it. And then the last piece is maybe going beyond the four walls to look at your vendors, the third parties that you're working with that maybe are storing the data subjects data for you. Lots of organizations start off with a data map, and then we're starting to see more and more organizations thinking about, okay, how do we get our head around this vendor piece and where the data goes. The interesting solutions will be where you can get an inventory of your vendors at a given snapshot of time. It could be a list of your current vendors, or a year ago, this is the list of in that particular month, that's your list of vendors that were storing data for you, and that this particular data subject that's running a DSAR, this is where we can find their data, for example. And then we can automate sending out notices to those vendors in an automatic way to get that data back. So lots of opportunities for gains in efficiency there. If we come back to this idea of context again, just to bring that to life a little bit with an example. Here we can see we have a receipt for an order that's been placed. So there's certain bits of data there that we would want to keep a track of, but we certainly wouldn't necessarily call it sensitive data at this point. However, as we add more information to the data set and we get a wider picture of what those data elements are part of, it becomes slightly more sensitive. Here we've added the company name, we've added the address as well. Now we've added the party affiliation, so clearly more sensitive data now. And then finally, maybe we add the payment information. So then, PCI compliance starts to come into play. So remember, looking at a single piece of data may not seem sensitive in isolation, but it can increase based on the context. For example, another example might be if you have someone's name, well, it's just a name. But if you know that name is being retrieved from a patient database from a given medical facility, well, then you know that that's a person. It's not just a name, it's a person that had a specific medical treatment, for example, and that's clearly much more sensitive information than it looked to be initially. So it's really, really important to understand the context and to use, leverage AI to try and map out those different, not just to find the data, but also to find the wider data set and the context of that data. And really important to use AI engines that have been trained and modeled based on privacy use cases and privacy data, because that does make a difference in terms of how good the AI engine will be and how complete a view of these different scenarios the AI engine will be. So before we go into the DSAR process itself, excuse me, and how we can automate it, it's worth mentioning, obviously, that the best way to fix a problem is to stop it happening in the first place. So this is coming back to this idea of how privacy is moving into trust, and the more we are trusted by our stakeholders, the less likely it will be that we will get to this point. I mean, that's the hope and the theory. However, if they are at the point where they're raising a DSAR, then clearly it's a very sensitive moment. An individual's proactively wanting to exercise their privacy rights. So we have to be aware that whatever trust was built up has been damaged in some way. We want to sort of understand why they're doing this. So what's driving it? Is it just a research? Is it just for researching information? Or are they really looking to completely step away from our company or our brand? Either way, we want the experience to be as decent as possible so that we don't add fuel to the fire. So again, we're looking at the different identities, and the more we know about them and their intentions, the more we can understand maybe what they're looking to do. Do they just want to find out about us, or do they really want to erase all their data, for example? So at a high level, this is the privacy rights or DSAR fulfillment request process. First off, obviously, we need to receive the request. Then we need to verify the identity of the person making that request. Are they actually the data subject that they're purporting to be? Next, obviously, we need to find the data that they're requesting. And then potentially we may need to redact some of that data before we give it back to them. And then when we do give it back to them, it needs to be done in as secure way as possible. So kind of that all makes sense. I'll just show a little sort of end-to-end demo for you of it. This is the OneTrust intake form for privacy rights information. It's optional to use. Some of our customers use APIs. That way they can completely control the look and feel of the UX of the web page. But the lion's share, excuse me, the lion's share, I would say, typically use this form, and it's a form that's evolved a lot over the years. We've added a lot of automation and embedded a lot of logic into it, which you can modify using clicks, not code. And it dynamically adapts subsequent questions based on the questions that are being answered. We can see here there's the loyalty ID field. It's great to get that extra context, again, coming back to what I was saying about understanding what identity they're showing up as. If we only have their email, maybe we'll delete everything linked to that email, but actually what they really wanted was to just get out of our loyalty program, but we didn't take the loyalty ID, so we missed that. So it's really important to get that extra elements of data so that we can be more sure about what they want to achieve. So here we're verifying their ID. We're using an SMS, so two-factor authentication here. And then they get notified via email that their data has been is ready to be viewed. They can go into the secure portal, they can see the data, and then they can download their data as well. Now, different amounts of time will pass between these two, but obviously the more we can automate, the slicker we can make this process. So it's really, really important. So that's the sort of demo, one step at a time. But let's sorry, the whole end to end. Let's sort of step through it one step at a time now. So firstly, back to the privacy web form. Again, thinking about what the try and include as much information as we can on this form. If you're, for example, if you're a group that houses many sub-brands, you know, we need to know which one they're referring to. Which one does the data subject actually referring to? They may have landed and be completely unaware that you house multiple brands. You know, if they want to change their data with Waitrose, but they want to continue having a great experience with John Lewis, you don't want to accidentally remove and limit their data from both, because they'll have a bad experience next time they try and shop with John Lewis, for example. So again, the more data we can get from them at this point, the better we can understand their actual requirements, rather than having to make those assumptions. We've got customers who are further automating this process. So they integrate this web form with their CRM, for example. So as soon as a customer puts in their email, they can check whether the customer exists in their CRM. If the customer doesn't, they can flag, you know, we don't recognize you. Do you have some other ID that you could use? And that speeds up that process, because we don't want the clock to be ticking at this point. But we can't actually confirm who their identity is for maybe another few days, because we're having to go back to them manually. So we can automate that process. If we do find them in the CRM, we can pre-populate some of the other fields for them. So again, making this process, you know, nice and smooth and easy to do, and also ensuring that we get accurate data back from them and no typos. Other customers tie this into the call center experience, so we can have a, you know, potentially they can have automated call center numbers. You know, press 1 or press 2 if you want to access your data, and that will automatically send them a link to this intake form. So, you know, that we're tying the two experiences together from the call center to the website, and both are automated. You know, so there's automation all over the place. So obviously it's crucial that when we do service these data access requests, we authenticate the customer fully. If we rush to fulfill the request and send the data to the wrong person, or forget to redact data that isn't appropriate for the data subject to see, we could inadvertently cause a data breach. And we need to also be aware of the threat of cyber criminals using the DSAR process to obtain personal data surreptitiously. So we really need to have a you know, it's one of the most critical steps in the process. In the end-to-end demo, we saw the email phone verification option, obviously the most common option, I would say. If we can get them to log in, existing user login, that's great, it's optional. But if they do, then again, we know so much more about their identity, and we can be, you know, much more mindful in terms of serving them up the right experience, and making, you know, instead of just guessing, we can know what they're here for, and guide them in the right way. Third-party authentication identity services like Experian, these are very popular with financial services organizations, where, you know, much more risk averse, and it's a much deeper identity check is required in those systems. And then moving on to the data discovery piece, and this is where automation really comes into its own, of course. The list of manual tasks associated with fulfilling the request, once you've identified the individual, is almost endless, isn't it? There's all the effort to find the data, pull it together, and then the deletion or redaction, and then getting that back to the individual. There's so much opportunity for automation here. There's no hell on earth quite like having to manually fulfill a DSAR request. I speak from personal experience, not at OneTrust, but in previous jobs. As we all know, DSARs must be actioned within 30 days unless an extension is sought. And, you know, this can really leave you scrambling to locate and identify and redact personal data. And it could go back years. Yeah, research from Talent shows that 58% of companies, GDPR relevant companies, failed to address DSARs within the 30 days time frame. So it's becoming more and more common practice for companies to seek an extension, but this adds to processing costs. And again, it's not the best experience for a customer for a data subject. It's worth also talking a bit more about employee DSARs. They surface slightly different challenges, you know, in terms of what data is exempt, in terms of exception handling, you know, for example, management forecasting or management planning data about a business. This is not data that needs to be shared. There's no need to share that. So performance data or any intellectual property, so that there will be exceptions that maybe aren't relevant to customer DSARs. it's really, really important that obviously there's different ID verification methods. It's really important to work with the HR team to understand what systems this data may be housed in, because it will be different from a customer DSAR. So who are the system owners? Are there any opportunities for automation? You know, how can we, if we're going to get the same data out of this system, can we scan it? Can we set up automated rules to get that data out? And also, of course, we need to work with HR to understand which data may need to be redacted as well. On the topic of retrieving the data, I highly recommend the use of APIs to connect into systems. It could be, you know, more classic examples like Salesforce, Oracle's, and we can fully automate some of this as well. We can automate just a portion or the whole thing, depending on how you want to set this up. I'm just looking at a view into OneTrust here. We take this data and then consolidate it once it's been recovered. So if we look at the screen here, we've verified the ID. We're now in the information gathering stage, and there's a list of subtasks to do in this stage. The first one is a legal hold review, and that's a manually assigned one for Jean. Again, these are optional; these don't need to be manual. And then the rest of them are systems. So these are all automated. So these will all fire, these will all trigger simultaneously, unless we want them to fire in a certain order. You know, for example, this first one maybe is, we've got the email, go and find the customer ID based off this email. Once we get the customer ID back, then all these other tasks and use the customer ID to get the data. So we maybe want to daisy chain them in that sense, but we don't have to. And even the manual, you know, legal hold review, that first one, the manual tasks, we can automate that to a point. So when all the other system tasks are done, we can automatically email Jean to let her know that everything's been done, and now it's ready for her to do that manual review if we wanted to, for example. Okay, so now we've mentioned redaction a little bit. Let's have a look in a bit more detail. So, and you know, as a privacy team, we need to think about what data we need to redact from these systems. If we look on the left of the slide, here are the typical categories that we would want to redact. So we're giving the data subject back their data, but it may include other data that belongs to other, data that belongs to other data subjects. So in which case we would need to redact that other data. And again, coming back to what I was saying about any confidential company data that the organization isn't obliged to share, we would need to redact that as well. Then on the right side of the slide, we can see the two types, and you know, the customer requests tend to be a bit more predictable. You know, the customer touch points are a bit more predictable. We know what systems are going to be used. It's the call center, it's the website, it's those classic customer touch points, and the data that is exchanged is a bit more predictable there as well. So a bit more structured in the data. And again, some examples of the you know, Salesforce, Zendesk, the kind of systems that we might be looking for sensitive data based off of those DSARs. When it comes to employee requests, a bit more complex. You know, the communication channels are not as fixed as they are with customers. You know, we can interact with people within our company in lots of different ways and lots of different channels, Slack, Teams, emails, even WhatsApps. You know, there's all sorts of ways that companies chat and collaborate, of course, all sorts of different tools. And back to the Teams examples or the Zoom examples of where there may be data. So again, important to work with the IT team, important to work with the HR team so that we really understand what data we're looking at there. Once we've consolidated that down, as I mentioned before, maybe we want to do this manual review step. It's important to you know, have a system that gives you the option. If we see here, we can then manually review the data. We can look at the suggested redactions. We can look at the attachments, the files that we're about to send to the data subject. What's also important is to have a system that allows you to choose your own sort of threshold. You know, what confidence level are you willing to let this through in an automated fashion, and which scenarios would you want to actually put a little hold there and do some manual reviews on there. We do have customers that at the beginning of their, you know, when they first go live, they manually check more, and then as their as they get a bit more comfortable about where the confidence levels and thresholds need to be and the alerts need to be, then they automate a bit more. Once the system's bedded down, then they move to mostly automated, but still have some edge cases where they want to manually review. It's entirely up to what your organization's risk appetite is. And then the last thing, obviously, it's feeding back that data to the data subject in a as secure way as possible. This is the OneTrust secure portal, and even at this point, we can add automation. So here we can for the access controls, for example, we could decide how long can the data subject come back and view that data. How long do we want that access to be there? We can automatically retire the access. We can automatically delete the data from the portal as well, rather than have to remember to go back and do that after a certain amount of time. So a small thing, but an important piece of automation as well. So that's the sort of the flow of the DSAR process and all the different ways that we can make that a bit more frictionless and automate it so that it's less effort on our side and a better experience for the data subject. Again, coming back to the point I made initially about, let's try and build trust so that we hopefully avoid the DSAR being raised in the first place. We're seeing more and more people, more and more privacy practitioners working with the marketing team to build out more information on the website, building out these trust centers, so that when customers love the experience until they don't, and then when at that point they want data and they want it quickly, and they can be reassured quite effectively by having all this data around. So having the link to the DSAR intake form surrounded by lots of accompanying information can often avoid that sort of that DSAR request getting through. So yeah, having that central repository of information is really, really key. So to summarize, I think the three most interesting areas where we can add automation here, and some of the biggest wins is, again, it's the discovery piece where you can add automation to engage some discovery and start to automate how that data is retrieved and shared. The redaction, I recommend you think about this if you aren't already. How do you work with your other teams and stakeholders to internally to make that list of data and systems that should be redacted? And then we've just spoken about trust centers and hopefully reducing the number of DSARs that you're getting as well. But ultimately, all of this is about getting the customer what they want, or the data subject what they want faster, and giving them a better and more streamlined experience in the process. So I mentioned at the beginning some metrics. As a leading privacy solution, OneTrust has a lot of benchmark data. Here's an anonymized case study to give you an example of the value of automating your DSAR processes. So in this example, which wasn't 100% end-to-end fully automated, it was mostly, but there was still manual steps in there. The company saw their cost to serve a DSAR reduce down over 99%. I mean, it almost couldn't be more compelling. It was a fully manual process to start with, and then as I said, it went to a mostly automated process. So quite compelling metrics to take back to your team, especially when you consider that since the pandemic, we've seen an influx of pre-litigation DSARs to support employment tribunals owing to a rise in redundancies. A survey of 460 UK-based DPOs from the UK Data Protection Index revealed an average of 10.85 DSARs a month, peaking at 18 in December 2020, so a 66% increase, and it's increased since then again. The same organization, if we go to another one, so same organization in terms of the return on investment and how quickly the move to automation, how quickly they saw the benefit. They saw a 300% return on investment over the first 3 years. So not only a significant reduction in the cost, but quick benefit as well. So they managed to get a bang for their buck really, really quickly. Findings from the data privacy group show that DSARs are costing UK businesses between £72,000 and £336,000 a year. Gartner estimates a single DSAR can cost £1,138 on average. So there's clear value to be had, and I do recommend that you take these metrics back to your colleagues and use them to build a business case around there. We can also help pull out these metrics for your individual case. We can have a conversation to obviously personalize these kind of metrics and make projections about how this kind of automation would help your particular organization rather than these other organizations. But I think these data points are really, really important as well. Okay, so the key takeaways then is that automation obviously helps across the board, but one of the key areas is in that data map. We need to get that up-to-date real-time data map, you know, it's a big old task to track the data, but also then retrieve the data when we need it. And so secondly, that every single step of the DSAR process can be improved by automation. And at every point, there's different ways that you could lean on automation to make a better experience, both for you and for the data subject as well. And then finally, the ROI is pretty compelling on this. So it really, it's low-hanging fruit, and the gains are clear to be made there. Okay, so that wraps up what I wanted to cover today. Thanks all for your time. Andy, should we check if there's any questions?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I'll give people a little chance to type away at the bottom of the screen. I see we've got a couple there as well that we can start with. Obviously, just before we start, I thought it might be a good idea to highlight our YouTube channel, Big Data London YouTube channel, where there's a lot of the talks from our show in September, including some good talks from OneTrust are in there. You can search that and watch that as a reference piece for free any time you would like to. This session will also go on there if there's any point that you want to sort of rewind and have a look at some of the under the hood stuff that we went through earlier. That should be up in a couple of days. If you subscribe to the channel, you'll get a little ping, etc., etc. In terms of questions, and yeah, thank you very much for sending some through. I'm going to start with the first one. It sort of links to the first takeaway, I think. In terms of leveraging the data discovery part to automate the data mapping, how can you do that across structured and unstructured data?
Yes, it's a good question. I do hear this a lot. You know, structured seems to be, you know, it's thought about as an easier way, you know, to start that data map, building that data map. You know, when I talk to customers, they often say, you know, we've got a handle on our structured data, but we feel that there's probably more risk in the unstructured data, but it just feels like a bit too complex, or how do we start, you know? I believe that whilst there's an argument for doing that, I think also I personally believe that it's best to take a risk-based approach on this, and go from there, you know. So understanding and leveraging previous work that you've done around, you know, PIAs and DPIAs, which may have already flagged which systems you have risk in, you know, and then start with those at a phase one, because regardless of the data type, you know that you're going to be hitting systems and reducing risk right from the word go. Ideally, you know, you can find a solution that doesn't necessarily focus on one or the other, structured or unstructured, but on that risk approach, and that's for me, that's the good place to start with prioritizing.
Cool. And then sort of looking, I don't know, maybe for people who are at the sort of start of this journey, how are they looking? How would you look at automating sort of privacy in general? You know, not just the sort of DSAR element of it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, yes, you're right. We focused on DSARs today, but clearly automation brings value across all of the privacy programs. It's a big question, one we hear a lot. if you've been doing stuff manually in the past, where do you start? What's the step-by-step kind of thing? Because you wouldn't necessarily start straight away with DSARs. So I would say the first thing, if you're not leveraging something to help inventory your assets and scan the data elements within those assets, if you're doing that manually, going to your business stakeholders and saying, what have we got in this box? What are you processing here, there, and one by one? Well, then for me, that would be step one. Finding a tool that can help you scan and classify the data in the systems, not just where that data is, but going beyond the metadata to actually scanning the data itself. Don't just take it, if there's a description field, a free text field, you need to be actually scanning that as well. As there's an attachment to an email, you need to be able to scan the attachment, because it won't necessarily tell you just from the name whether it's sensitive data or not. So a system that can really scan the data landscape to help you understand what you've got, I would say, is essential. But you don't have to boil the ocean. I'm going to quite a detailed example there. Start with the primary things, like I said, those systems you've identified through PIAs as being higher risk systems. Start with those. Maybe some databases are easier to connect to than others. Maybe more modern. Maybe you may have some legacy systems that are not going to be that easy to scan. I'm not going to be that, maybe they don't even support APIs. Some companies still do have those legacy systems. So I would definitely go for the ones that have been flagged with risk, or that are easier to connect to, and maybe ones that support row masking functionality. So maybe some more modern databases as well. And then you can, from that small number, you can then build up and add extra systems and scan extra systems. And then from there, it's understanding, a better understanding of where the data is, but also you may be finding data in systems where you didn't expect it to be. Maybe start bubbling up some violations, and you can start, applying policies that actually minimize the data and therefore minimize your PI footprints and therefore your overall risk. You can start applying compensating controls onto them. And then the next phase onto that would be, well, you've connected into these systems, you can begin to automate, as we saw today, your DSAR requests. So you can automate the DSARs, and then you could also add additional work streams into it. The Nirvana is where you're automating your consent management standpoint, enforcing policies in an automated way, managing your vendors and the risk that they may be posing in an automated way, cross-border transfers, everything that touches your privacy programs, you can automate as well.
Perfect. And in terms of getting the slides, that'll be fine, I imagine, Peter. But maybe put them up on LinkedIn or something like that. That'll be perfect. So yeah, and obviously, like I said, the video will be widely available on all of sort of Big Data London social media afterwards. One thing that interested me about the use case actually was obviously, fantastic results speak for themselves, etc. However, what sort of length of time does an organization need to get to that kind of level of automation and that level of results, sort of thing? Is it obviously automation takes time, you have to automate things, but how much time are we looking at for a good use case like that?
So it can be, it's very much a sort of crawl, walk, run that I've just walked through. A lot of it will depend on the culture of the company that's implementing these programs, how bought in all the stakeholders are, how many people that they're dedicating to that program of change. It will also depend on, typically we're talking about data. We've talked about data all the way through. Some companies have a better handle on their data. Some will think, oh, we're about to implement a privacy solution. This is a good moment to do some data cleansing. And it's absolutely the right instinct to have, but clearly that will impact the implementation timelines. Some will also say, look, we're going to automate some processes. Well, let's review the processes. And again, it's absolutely the right instinct to have. But by the time we've reduced some of those processes down or reviewed the processes, again, that can add the timeline in. So, it could go from weeks to months, depending on how big even if we go in a crawl, run, sprint kind of way, even if we're not trying to boil the ocean to start with, it could still take some time depending on how we want to approach it. As with all software, you can change your processes, you can flex your processes to fit in with how the software, or what the sort of the benchmark of the software delivers, or you can flex the software to fit in with your processes, or you kind of meet it somewhere in the middle. And that's the same for any software. It could be CRM, it could be e-commerce. You have the ability with modern software, SaaS software, to bend it to your will, but by doing so, there will be some configuration to do. Whereas if you change your processes to fit with the software, then it's going to be a faster implementation. So there's all these variables that can come into it. But as I say, it could be weeks, could be months, depending on the other variables that are going around the project. Hope that was a very waffly answer.
No, not at all. I would pick up something in the answer. Actually, I'll make this the last question, given the time constraints we have. But and I'll make it a difficult question as well for you, just to end things off in a friendly manner. So we're talking about culture and things like that. You mentioned a trust center, which obviously is a decent starting point, or maybe not a starting point. Maybe it's something that comes afterwards. To get a good culture within your company, privacy culture, what's a good way of fostering it? Because I know it's like all sorts of things like this. Getting the organization as a whole excited about privacy. It's easy if you're a privacy professional, obviously, or a governance professional, or something like that. What can you do to inspire your company to be more privacy driven and for wider buy-in from the company at large?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? It's like finding extra days in the week is one of the ways. It's finding a genuine, I would recommend a genuine interest in the programs that are happening around the organization. Again, this takes time, right? But if you can get involved or not involved, but if you can even be aware of what the marketing team are doing in terms of what campaign are they launching, how are they changing the website, then you can hopefully be involved in whatever way in the design of that new look web page. And where can we bubble up privacy in there? Where can we, you're going to capture some data. Well, have you thought of, so it's being involved in those conversations, not in a kind of, oh, why don't you do it like this, but just being aware of those programs. And the best way to do that is just to offer support and offer good advice and make, softly is what I would recommend there. But ultimately, even if we look at data retention, it's actually there's a lot of teams around our organization that actually are on board with this. We sort of think even marketing teams, obviously it sounds weird to say they want less data, but I mean, they want quality rather than quantity. In the move to zero-party data, first-party data, marketing teams know that they need to be smarter with the data they can get and get the best data they can get, rather than just sort of the cruxes and the third-party data, which is more a thing of the past. So actually, most teams do want less data. There's a cost to it, a financial cost, a carbon footprint cost, there's a security cost, more risk of data breach. So IT, security, ESG team, all of these teams actually are on board with a lot of the privacy. It's about giving it seeing it from their point of view and seeing what value and advantage they will get from it, and then pitching that. Basically, you do have to be a salesperson, I think.
Yes, I think that's true of everything now. But yes, no, excellent advice, I would say as well. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Peter. I really enjoyed that. I hope everybody at home enjoyed it. Hope you're keeping warm. This is probably going to be our last broadcast before Christmas now. So we'll obviously come back to you in January once England's won the World Cup and once we've had Christmas and all these fantastic things have happened in the rest of December. Big Data London, the event, will be launching registrations in January. So make sure you keep an eye out for that, where you can come and meet fantastic companies like OneTrust and others, and obviously take advantage of our free conference program and the ability to meet everybody, etc. We'll be doing that again in Olympia in September. So just keep your eyes and ears open for that. But once again, thanks so much, Peter. Thanks for your time, and thanks for a great presentation. And we will bid you farewell and see you in the new year. So thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Andy.
We'll see you soon. All right. Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.